Hello everyone! Be very welcome to the new episode of Albums of the Month, where I review the albums of the month. And before I actually jump into the albums, I just want to add a quick addendum. I now have a Twitter! This is my username, the link's probably going to be in the description, so that's probably easier for you, And follow me there to see some amazing posts like this one and this one. At first I was kinda lukewarm on this, but the more I listened to it, the more it grew on me. So now I'm pretty confident saying that this is my new favorite Descendents record. Yes, I like it more than Milo Goes to College. Yes, you can call me a degenerate now. The lyrics aren't always a hit to me. Sometimes they sound a bit whiny, and the rapid-fire nature of the record makes them feel a little underdeveloped, or even inconclusive. But putting that aside, this is possibly the most musically exciting I've ever heard the band sound. Especially due to the bass lines. The bass lines here are gold. Yeah, guaranteed. I may not be totally in touch with the Descendents' discography, but this motivated me to keep listening to their stuff. And it's quite a lot to say coming from a band that exists in this planet for twice as long as I do. You also have the permission to call me a baby now, yay! Positive highlights, negative highlights, and the score is 81%. Woo! My main problem with this simulation is how awfully generic that album was. This one is still kinda generic, but at least we have some more personality, even if it's a little sparse. But regardless, it's still an evolution. The songs in here live for the title of the album. They are very all over the place. We have some more run-of-the-mill trap songs, some songs that remind me of 2000s house music, and others that give me more of a Latin pop vibe. Hopefully in the next album he will include a harsh noise track. Hey! With that said, while I think it's an overall better record from KSI, I still believe he needs to evolve more. The positive highlights are just good, and the negative highlights are better than the ones from the simulation. But considering how shit is his YouTube persona, I think he could show a little more of that personality in his music. Actually, never mind. Saying it out loud made me realize it's not a good idea. Anyway, 64%. I feel like this is the evil counterpart to Heaven Shall Torture Your Mind. It's more chaotic, Tumor seems to be getting really into the noise pop side, and while to me this is usually a negative point, I think I like this more than his last album. To me, the heavier breakdowns seem to match really well with the psychedelic stylings. I don't know how well this will translate in album length, but at least for this 18 minutes listen, it worked very nicely. We did have a dud in the tracklist, but nothing that ruined the overall quality of the project. The positive highlights wouldn't let this happen. I'm really curious to see where he'll go from now. Tumor is really one of the most interesting faces in modern music. I just hope I don't get a tumor for listening to this. I mean, the covers aren't too shabby, but come on. They're so virtually similar to the originals that at this point you might just want to listen to the original songs instead. And for the second half, where it's live versions from songs from his latest album, yeah, I guess some of them were improved, but not a whole lot. It's like a Magikarp that instead of evolving to a Gyarados, it evolved to a slightly bigger Magikarp that can bake oatmeal cookies. So not a whole lot of improvements. Pretty much, it's all just okay. To the point that I'm just indifferent towards it. Positives and negatives, 53%. In my view, this album is overall better than her debut, but in compensation, the highs aren't nowhere near as high as the ones from her debut album. This feels like a more mature version of Billie's sound. And if you are familiar with that definition, it usually means that it is more boring. But I don't think that adjective fits well in this case. While sometimes the instrumentation to me feels a little wimpy, it's generally compensated by the introspective lyrics, which I think are the high point of the record. But as I've mentioned before, the instrumentals sometimes fall flat. And needless to say, this is a music album, so it pushes the record down considerably. But it's still a notable improvement to Billie, and I hope she only keeps going up from here. By the way, allow me to become the music theorist for a moment, but I have a theory that NDA samples the Among Us theme and no one can prove me otherwise. And here comes the positive highlights, making their way carrying the score of the record. There we go. Oh, and there's those two. It's pretty good. Not as good as Volume 2 was, but overall, yeah. At least the title of the EP makes more sense. Volume 1 still has Shook, which is my favorite song by her, but Volume 3 is full of potential runner-ups. Many songs in here are some of the most luxurious trap songs I've ever heard. And god, I love those bass boots. Wait, did I just say bass boots? What the hell is wrong with me? Bass boots. What would that even look like? Anyway, I love those bass boosts that show quite often here. But those points are also valid in Volume 2, so... But I think Volume 2 does that with a little more fierce. But even with that, there's just not many reasons to dislike this project. I feel like the weakest point of here is the opening track, which is my negative highlights, but even with that, this is one hell of a great release, and gives us even more reason to believe Tkay Maidza is the queen of trap music. The positive highlights make her crown shine even brighter, and the score settles it in her head. 86% superb. I wasn't a fan of the teaser tracks of the album, but I think this is actually quite decent. I guess I can say that lately I feel everything this album has to offer. I'm really awful today, Jesus Christ. I think the production feels strangely foggy. The guitars feel buried, and the first half of the record feels unfinished. Luckily the second half is much better. If you notice, all my positive highlights lay there. Also, I gotta say, I really like the sound of Willow's voice. To me it's a very pleasant tone, but her singing needs improvement, especially in the high notes. There are some serious mood breakers in here because of that. Naive would be a positive highlight if it wasn't for that bad high note in the end. Besides that, this is honestly a pretty competent dive to the genre, and I hope she someday makes an album that I truly like. My favorite is still her self-titled, but it's not an album that I love. As herself says in here, she just needs to grow. 61% superb. This album had a huge potential to be great, but it isn't, and there's one crucial reason for that. I'm making two with my fingers. This record is very overproduced. It has an 80s synth-pop vibe, but it feels like it's trying way too hard to make it work. It reminds me of Starship at its most bloated. It's a sound that you're okay with when the first listens, but the more you dive into it, the more annoying it gets. This without mentioning that at points Laura over-emotes her vocals, and it contributes a lot to the loud mess. But for the notes, I don't think this album is a total train wreck. There are a handful of songs that I honestly think are pretty good, and even the negative highlights aren't too shabby either. The compositions and the lyrics are pretty decent, and I do see them working with a more tame production. Sadly, it's not really the case here, but hopefully she gets it right in the follow-up. But for Pink Noise, it's 59% superb. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone make noise to the album of the month. I am convinced now that Nicolas Jarre is one of the most interesting musicians in the modern everything scene. I already liked a lot the Cenizas album that he dropped last year, and with this new project, I think I want to dive deeper into what he does. I absolutely love the stunning production of this album. The background is discreet, and the foreground is very pronounced, giving a very atmospheric vibe to the whole album. It transports me to the inside of a ravine in the middle of a forest. And I don't mean the Minecraft ones, I mean an actual ravine. The only real criticism I have here is that the record only gains momentum after the third track. This is clearly noticed by my negative and positive highlights. But it's not a huge misdemeanor. I still really like this record, and I strongly believe this is one of the best releases of the year. I mean, album of the month, what can I say? 88%.
I'm unequivocally feeling a 10 on this album.
We'll see about that, Fantano. We'll see about that. Yeah, I guess it's not bad. I guess the first thing I must talk about is what virtually everybody else is. That is its resemblance with Kate Bush. It's very clear that this was Spelling's main influence to the sound of this album, and even the vocals sound like how Bush would sing if she had a post-punk band in the style of Squid or Black Midi. And for the sound of the record, it's actually pretty amazing. To me, it feels like songs that could be sang in a musical, by a character that's like a nice wizard or something similar. And it's an atmosphere that I quite enjoy, especially in the positive highlights. I don't think this album's a 10 though, or in this case, 100% superb. There are some moments, especially in the second half, that feel a little half-baked, and left to be desired to me. But in an overall, this is a pretty amazing record that I get the hype. 83%. I know I never talked much about Vince Staples here, but here's my opinion about the guy. I think he's incredibly talented, and Big Fish Theory is one of my favorite rap albums of the past decades. Now, with that in mind, I must say that this new Vince Staples album is not good. And believe it or not, Vince himself is not the main guilty here. The lyrics he delivers are actually really robust and personal, and they are the record's silver lining. But Vince's deadpan delivery personally didn't please me. But the real villain here is definitely Kenny Beats. His production is like a black hole of charisma. The beats are mediocre as all heck, completely forgettable, and do a huge disfavor to the records. They aren't offensively bad, but because of that, it makes the album feel like such a passive, soulless project, especially considering what Vince has released prior to this. I guess the only song that I actually like here is the opening track, but even that is not a song that I would return very often. So the best way to define this album, to me, is a huge disappointment. 36%. Actually, this one is interesting. It's horrible, but in a completely different way of the Tramp Stems EP. The lyrics are occasionally pointless and they contradict themselves. And there's a lot of very annoying tracks in here. But surprisingly, nothing here comes even remotely close to being as irritating as Dance Monkey. She still sounds like the would-be attempt of Honey Boo Boo into a popcorn soap, just very toned down. There was in fact a few songs in here that were honestly acceptable, and I also think that the production is not bad either. There are some ideas in here that I do like to see in electropop material, like the intro of Just a Mess, that is the best moment of the album, but even with that said, I would never return to this album ever again. The cons outweigh way too much the pros. It's like putting an overconfident teenager to fight against The Undertaker. It's definitely bad, but it's not entirely off. Therefore, the score of this album is 28% superb. I was thinking of a funny way to introduce the collage of the month, but I couldn't think of anything. So I enjoy the collage by itself, plus this picture of Beyoncé falling. I have to keep the comedy, what can I say?